being an educator, I find myself frequently depressed about what seems to me to be a change in education. When I went to college, I just went to see what college would have to offer. I would take my classes and get excited about things that I had never heard of before or thought of. And, I developed a love of literature, a love of philosophy. There was all this fascinating stuff out there, right? And it wasn't aimed at, how will this get me a job that will get me promoted, that will get me to, right? It closes off the possibility. It doesn't even suggest to people, well, find something you're passionate about and then develop that. Or it doesn't ask you to be kind of self-exploratory. You think you know what you want and you go for it, and then it's not what you want. And that, I think, can create a crisis of meaning. So what I would like is to be able to turn the public discourse around from that and, kind of encourage people to step back and ask questions about what will make my life worth living earlier in the day and approach their opportunities in that spirit.
All right, so we're doing part 2, or episode 2 rather, of the Susan Wolf appreciation series. I don't know exactly what we're going to be calling it yet. But so, okay, we're continuing to move through her moral philosophy, and we're doing an essay of hers called Moral Obligations and Social Commands. So I guess what I'm going to do to start out the episode from now on, presumably, is I'm going to read like the first part of the reading response that I have to do for class on this. And basically it's just supposed to be like an idea of how I'm summarizing the paper. Like this is how I read it. So, I think implied there's the fact that I could obviously be wrong in even how I'm reading what Wolf's doing. So, all right, I'll read this and then I guess we can just get started. All right. So the way I'm reading Wolf here is that she's aiming to better understand and defend a distinction between moral obligation on the one hand and mere moral goodness on the other hand. So she's going to say that an obligation of any kind seems to issue from someone rather than no one. And from this, it can be asked just who issues moral obligations. So she dismisses, first of all, rightly in my view, any obvious or overt divine command theory of obligation. And then she moves to softly defending a social command theory, which is saying that things can be obligatory because society demands them of its members. So first, Wolf eliminates the plausibility of living without obligations, saying this would lack certain strengths, namely the ability to put more serious pressure on recipients, distinguishing between obligatory and desirable, and somewhat implicitly suggesting that commands are clearer or more easily obeyed than mere considerations or motivations. Next, Wolf eliminates 2 non-command theories of obligation. First, a hypothetical imperatives account, which is just saying, if you want to be more moral, then do action X. And she dismisses that for being too weak or too instrumental. She thinks that we want to have our moral obligations have more than just an if-then structure, although I take it that that's fine for merely good acts. Secondly, she dismisses a reasons-based view of obligation for being 1, epistemically cloudy, 2, unclear about standing to sanction, 3, analogous to non-blameworthiness in non-moral cases, 4, unclear on social expectations, and 5, clashing with intuition. There are clear cases, she says, wherein decisive reasons and moral obligation are not the same thing. They're not commensurate. So therefore, Wolf settles on a social command theory for its clarity and power towards blaming to reform. She implores us to recall that we are not defending the content of any moral theory, rather the form which obligations take in any given one. So that's kind of how I would summarize what Wolf is doing in this. Obviously, that's kind of a mouthful, to say the least. But I don't know. Okay, first of all, what'd you guys think of this paper in general? I thought I had the hopeful suspicion that Giffin, you would like it based on the social command theory aspect of it. I for whatever reason, I thought that was something you might be interested in.
No, you were basically correct. I did like this paper a lot, actually. She anticipated some of my comments, and then other times, I had it like a question about something that she was saying that was like questionable, and then she addressed it afterwards. So it was a good paper. I really enjoyed it. The only thing is I felt like a little bit about like 2/3 of the way in, there was a moment where I was like, come on, Susan. Like, I feel like I was teased a bit. Obviously, I understand the structure of the paper. Like, it might have been like limited intentionally, but like, I don't know if it's worth me saying in detail, but I'll at least say it generally. Like, she kind of says like at the beginning, like, here are some major objections to like such a social command theory, and then later she says these I will not address. And I'm like, oh, come on. Otherwise, I thought it was really, really good paper.
Yeah. She definitely dismisses some things as being like either not within the scope of the paper, or just like she just says something like, I just can't address everything, so these are going to be things that I like choose not to address. Yeah,
and it's understandable, but like I thought the framing at the beginning kind of made me anticipate an address of those things, and instead it was like, I will not be addressing it like 2/3 of the way, and I was like, oh, that's a little disappointing. She at one point was like, maybe another author will. I'm like, okay. Like, I understand it, like, you have to pick your battles, but that was a minor disappointment in what was otherwise a pretty interesting read.
You know what's interesting too is like I didn't have this feeling at all when we talked about asymmetrical freedom and the importance of having free will. I honestly didn't have this feeling, which makes me think that it's some fault of mine. But like, I'll read. So the last two papers, I've read them and I've loved them, but then I almost feel like her conclusion is like within grasp, but it's kind of like hazy to me, but in a way that I feel like is almost my fault. I don't know. Do you get like it? Well,
I think I was the least thrilled about Wolf's previous papers that we read. So I think that actually maps onto what I kind of felt. Like, I thought it was introducing pretty interesting topics. It was definitely worth discussing, but like in terms of like hard conclusions, they either felt like limited by like framing, or were just like I was not fully clear on, which again, that definitely could be, my fault.
Like the earlier papers, I will say, I thought those opened it up to almost like new areas of philosophy for like future people to kind of hop on board and kind of do some of the work there. I thought like she did like a really, really good job of just kind of reframing questions or how to approach these things. Absolutely. I'm going to be honest though, I wasn't the biggest fan of this paper. I didn't like, and maybe you hope to provide me with some of the verbiage here, but I didn't like that she didn't make some like clear distinctions that came to my mind. I don't know, maybe I could be wrong, but like, I don't know why she was okay. So here, I'll lay out some facts here. And
wait, real quick.
Some hard facts.
Can I say?
Well, no, maybe not hard facts, but go ahead.
I think it's actually worth mentioning that this episode and from now on, we're recording before I have class. Yes. So this is going to take like much more. I'm assuming that these are going to take a bit more of an exploratory view than last time. Yes. Last time the problem is like, it wasn't a problem, but I almost like had many of the answers in hand, and this is more about like trying to. So okay, I just wanted
discover
to
them. Very good point, actually.
Yeah, but so she acknowledges the fact that at least like from like a social perspective, like a social command theory in this sense. Okay, we're gonna have like different societies that we're a part of, right? Like we could be kind of like. You can almost imagine like a Venn diagram where you're kind of like situated in the middle of like several different societies, and those might have different values. And it's like, I do think it's very, very reasonable to align yourself with one society over another. Like, and for example, like, okay, we're all in the United States, but we don't expect everyone within the United States to hold our values, and we don't hold the values of the United States. You know what I mean? Like, in reality, like
communist alert.
Yeah, it's like we have certain social groups that we're a part of that are, to varying sizes, that we kind of like expect. What is the term she uses? Like moral directives? Is that what it is? Or what was the term?
Are you talking about obligations in general, or
no? It's the term that she says like it's a compelling reason. To
decisive moral reasons.
Decisive moral reasons. Yeah. Just I I would expect certain decisive moral reasons out of certain groups that I'm in. You know what I mean? Like, for example, like her SUV example. Like when I was reading through that, she was like, okay, so when, just a little background for whoever's listening, but she says like, okay, there are certain people in her life that drive an SUV and it's a gas guzzler. And
it's also less safe for other people on the road, including pedestrians. Yeah,
including you and yourself.
Yeah. Which I was surprised to hear that.
Yeah,
I actually did hear that before. It's like a wildly inefficient vehicle unless you have a specific purpose, which is exactly what you mentioned. But anyways,
yeah, true.
Yeah, so it's like it's less safe for the driver, for pedestrians, for the road, for the environment. So all around, like there are good moral reasons
decisive
not to
in
buy,
fact, she said.
Decisive moral reasons not to buy the car, right? Okay, fine. But then she raises an interesting point asking like, okay, is it an immoral act? And I at large, I kind of agree with her. Like, I'm not sure it's immoral, but then I kind of like reduce it to a smaller social group, like say like, someone I consider to be, I don't know, philosophically sound, or someone who's well educated and they're well aware of those things, right? Well, now it starts to seem a little moral to me, actually. I might even begin to start placing it into that, because it's like, it's not, I'm not looking at society at large, and some of these reasons might not be available to the average person because society doesn't expect that. You're not obliged by society, but you're certainly obliged by, your peers, or, people that, you spend time with or associate with. I don't know. I mean, am I off base here?
I completely, well, I somewhat agree, but I like, whenever I read that over and she said like, I do not, like, straightforwardly, let me pull it up. She says like, I do not believe that it is immoral. They are under no obligation to choose a smaller car. So that like establishes not only like her views on like the SUV situation, but also like the relationship between the word immoral, which I don't even know if she uses that like before this example, specifically the word immoral. And like the lack of obligation. Maybe it was just like highlighted as an example here more memorably than it like she introduced the topic previously in the paper, but like immoral. My first impression of that was like I think it probably like is immoral.
Like, she's
like,
using,
I was like, this is an example where she articulates exact like reasons, like it's almost unfathomable. And she says like even the subset of people who do not use it for its intended like most efficient purpose. So it's like pretty well defined as like a group of people, and it seemed immoral to me. Like that was my gut reaction. But overall, like I thought it was a good paper nonetheless, because it made me think about it.
But she does raise a good point though, that like at the societal level, like that's not a societal expectation or obligation for you to choose one car over the other, right? But like certainly,
but is it in conflict
local...
with some of our stated values as a society? So this kind of weaves into like the point I think later.
I thought Adam was making a slightly different point in that like Adam, like I heard your point as almost like kind of you were making a point about like the scope of society, almost like we inhabit
100%. Yes.
Yeah, we inhabit like many different societies to many different degrees, but those societies can be like within other ones to the point where like, okay, so you're saying like, okay, so you obviously belong to like the society of the United States, but within that you also belong to a much more specific society of like, educated, roughly middle class, or like potential to enter the upper middle class, kind of like you know what I mean, like that group of people.
Exactly.
And you're saying for like, and you also occupy like a subset that overlaps largely with that, which is like people who are concerned about and think about moral considerations. So it's like
exactly.
So like, given that you occupy that, one thing could be an obligation within that, but not within like the group of the United States as a whole. For
exactly my point. Exactly my point. So I wanted her to break down that a little bit more, because I'm like, I felt like some of the objections that she was like, we're not going to dive into here. It's like those could be solved by this distinction of how we define society.
Well,
like,
she raises the point that she's not sure if it could be, I think.
Well,
But-
so okay, here's my question then, because like Adam, I totally like I understand your point and I agree with it. Okay, so here's a question. I was reading this section and this example as, and this I'm not exactly clear on this. I was reading this as, supposed to be an intuitive example of why moral obligation can be decoupled from decisive moral reasoning. And then the question for me is, okay, how does that then fit into her social command theory? Because
Totally agree, and I'm
Okay.
saying they're not necessarily
Yeah.
decoupled. They can be, and
Okay.
I
By
totally
this
agree with her that they
example,
can
you
be
think.
exactly.
Okay. Okay.
But they're
Nice.
not necessarily decoupled.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. They're not. Well, so they're not. Well, she says that too. She says they're not
Yeah.
necessarily decoupled.
But they can be.
Agreed.
Okay, but
Agreed.
they can be.
And I'm
And
saying,
do you think this example wasn't one that demonstrated that very well?
no, I think it did demonstrate it very well on a
Oh.
certain societal level. But I'm
Yeah,
saying,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I'm saying, I wish she would have said, like, okay, but this
Yeah.
exact same example might in fact not be decoupled. Like,
Yes,
depending on
okay.
the society that we define, you know. So it's
Mhm,
like,
mhm.
I don't know. What do we think of that?
It was one of the things I wish you explored more. She says, like, this is an interesting, objection, and I hope another author will tackle it. And I'm like, okay.
You know what's funny is I think I told you guys this off air, but like the reading response is two parts, right? And they're roughly like 200 to 250 words each. It's supposed to be like, okay, summarize Wolf's point and then raise an objection to it. And the objection that I raised was very similar to what you said, Adam, but like a little bit different. And I even said, like, in the reading response, and like I genuinely think this, I don't understand to what degree this is actually an objection, or if this is saying like, I kind of agree with you, but be more specific. It's like, I don't know exactly where it falls, but I was thinking something along the lines of what you said, Adam, where Wolf in my mind kind of glosses over distinctions, or like she doesn't mention like abilities at all. Like abilities don't come up in this text at all. And I was thinking like, okay, like, doesn't an obligation, like when you have an obligation to do something, that is like, it kind of has to be like within your ability, like reasonably, all things considered, to do that thing, right? Like the reason why I might have an obligation to not purchase an SUV is because there are like very like reasonable alternatives, right? Even alternatives that make like more sense, right?
Yeah.
But if I were in, like, she even kind of like she like very loosely talks about this, but she mentions like, if you lived in, I don't know, a good, like, if you lived in like Switzerland, right? Like then you actually might have like a decisive, like then you might not have decisive moral reasons for not owning an SUV, given that like you may need a vehicle that's really good in snow or something like that, right?
Sure.
So okay, it's like I almost wonder, like, okay, when your abilities change, that is actually like what moves things from merely good to obligatory. Like that, like I'm almost wondering if like I'm almost wondering if like she's kind of like talking about it at too high a level in some sense, almost like, okay, like the reason why societal obligations could be commanded is because like you do have the like I don't know a better word for it, but like a reasonable ability to do something, right? Like,
Is this like an ought implies can kind of you're trying to wrap in here?
Yes, which to be fair, I actually don't know at all what I think about that, because on another hand, like this is a topic for another time, but like,
Okay.
On the other hand, I also think like ought does not imply can in like a potential sense, but like
Okay. I was just kind of curious if that's what you were trying to bring in, because that's what it sounded like. But I also had the same thing about like the practicality is kind of like the note I made. It's like, it is not mentioned at all, and you think that it would have some sort of like relationship to an obligation in particular because it involves punishment in this framework, right? Like someone's like, if you can kind of say like blanket wise, like you shouldn't own an SUV. Like if you're disabled in this and like live in a snowy area, like what are you gonna do?
So this is where I saw like real. Okay, actually, this is worth one of you looking up. Can you look up when this paper was published? Moral obligations and social commands, because I'm curious, because I see like real echoes of moral saints showing up in this, And I know Moral Saints was her first paper in like moral philosophy. Right? When was this first published?
I mean, I'm looking that up right now.
What I'm looking at says 2014. That seems.
I mean, that's plausible.
Wait,
I thought that
this is a chapter. I'm sorry, this is a chapter from a book that was published.
The book that I'm holding that you got the scan from, yeah. So
so
I don't think any of these essays are original.
2009 in Field Papers, it says.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense because I saw like a lot of echoes of Moral Saints in this paper.
So did I.
Yeah, in the sense that like so when she kind of decouples decisive moral reasons from obligations, that came back to her like plurality of values thing, where like rationally and morally you could have decisive reasons to do something, but then for other values that you hold, not do it.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Yeah, like I like this.
It makes this paper makes more sense in the context of having read Moral Saints previously. So I mean, I guess that's just like a brilliant framing from like your course.
Yeah,
but yeah, no, that adds a lot of important context because you see a lot of consistencies and like you can fill in some of the answers that aren't specifically raised by Wolf.
Because like I was thinking, because her example, I was like, grinning like, Riley while I was reading her example, because in a lot of ways, like she's directly talking about me in a lot of ways in that example, because it's like, okay, because I have like the 80s BMW, right? So there's like, okay, are there decisive reasons not to drive that car? Yes, like actually yes. It's not as fuel efficient as a newer car could be. It doesn't have airbags, so it's certainly not not as safe for me. It doesn't have ABS or anything like that, so it's way more dangerous for like the people around me on the road. Right? So it's like
well, that's why you moved to Texas, right? So that your society doesn't view that as an obligation.
Yeah, I'm like one of the people who drive here like off the chain. they're mad drivers here.
Given your situation, though, you can easily parse as being reasonable because it's just like, number one, you didn't buy the car, right? Like you're not.
But given that I could easily sell it, and then like it's like I do actually think I have decisive moral reasons because I could sell it to someone who's just like a collector or whatever, right? So it wouldn't be on the road. I would get more money than it would cost to buy a newer, more fuel efficient, more safe, just Corolla or whatever, right? So no, I actually do think there are decisive moral reasons, but I just value the car like because I spent so much time working on it, because it was my dad's before mine, like because I just aesthetically like it. You know what I mean? It's like all these other reasons.
Sure.
No, so, I agree with your assessment, Jordan. And, I think we all have something like that.
So
sure,
it's like,
of course.
So it's like, okay, honestly, though, do I have an obligation to like, so like what I'm thinking about here is like, okay, like, do I have an obligation actually to do that I'm just ignoring, or do I not have an obligation? Because like right I'm sorry, like the reason I'm asking is maybe I missed it, but doesn't she's just like when she decouples moral obligations from decisive moral reasons, is that anything more than just she says it's like it strikes us as intuitive?
Yes and let me kind of like take your example and go a little further with it here. So like say you ultimately become like a professor at some top university, right? And
don't tempt
like
the dream.
but let's just say, okay,
yeah.
And then they find out that you drive a BMW from the
no,
decoupled from the community.
nothing is said to you, but so you're still driving like a car akin to that, but everybody else like in the department is like hyper conscious of like their effect on the environment, and like you just drive a gas guzzler. Like do you think it would be fair on their part to say like you're obligated as like a member of like the hyper conscious in this sense to recognize that you shouldn't be driving a car like that?
This is why I actually thought that the underlying mechanism of obligation was ability, not merely like social group or whatever, or society, like the mini society that you're in, because it's like, okay, because I don't think that she's wrong to be like, okay, the social commands are issued from the society, but it's like The question is why they're issued, because I think the answer to your question could be yes, but it's not merely because I like surround myself with different people. Like presumably it's because I would have, a professor's salary or whatever, which is not crazy, but it's going to be like way more than I have now as a grad student, right? So it's like, so I'm almost wondering if like actually like your abilities are like the mechanism that is creating the societal command, or like
or at least commands are conscious of it or responsive to
like
ability.
Yeah, like that's what's driving them in some sense.
It's true. I definitely understand your point, but like maybe parse it out for me a little more. Like in your current situation, like or at least your earlier situation when you were driving that car, like you had the ability to have a different car, right? More, fuel
or just
economy car.
It might be easier to tweak the example a little bit and pretend like my car is actually not worth good money because it's like rare or whatever. Pretend it's like it's an old, inefficient, unsafe car, but I can't sell it for anything. So it's like I don't have that out, right? So I would need like a lot more money in order to do kind of like the thing that I had decisive moral reasons to do. Okay, like if you take me from say I live in a society of like, it's kind of a lower class society. Maybe it's like kind of, like urban, suburban, and people have just like many old cars that fit that description. And people are also like, not wealthy enough in that area to actually do what they have decisive moral reasons to do. Okay. It seems like on Wolf's account and matching our intuitions that I don't have an obligation then to.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that example? I was writing something down.
Okay. Basically, Giffin, I was just saying like, pretend my car wasn't worth a good bit of money if I were to sell it. Okay. So it's just like an old, inefficient, cheap car or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And I live in a society that everyone has that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. On Wolf's account and ours, it seems like I don't have an obligation to sell that car and upgrade, right? But the weird thing is that it seems kind of odd to me to say like I do. Okay, so that's at day whatever. The next day, I am accepted into a grad program that does not pay me any more money, but suddenly I'm surrounded by like very different people in a very different, and I move, you know what I mean? Like I move to a different part of that town or a different city, whatever, right?
Or different country, whatever.
So I'm in a different society in almost every respect, but like nothing about my circumstances with respect to my ability to change cars has changed. It feels weird to say like now I'm suddenly under an obligation based on the societal command, given that like nothing else has changed, right? I almost feel like the obligation grows stronger as I'm like, maybe, I don't know, like in that community more to the point where like other options open for me. I don't know. Like, again, that's just an intuition that I have, but it seems weird.
It's a good example. Yeah. I mean, that does seem unintuitive. Although frankly, I would say it's like before reading this, when I interrogated the concept a little bit more strictly, I probably would have said that like in the example where kind of everyone's doing it, it may still be a moral obligation that just everyone's failing.
It's like, who's obligating you? It's like, is it society? Like who is commanding?
Because remember, she dismisses, she well, not dismisses, but she doesn't find, she doesn't align with a no command theory of obligation.
Right.
Yeah. For reasons that I guess we could actually talk about. Like, I think those are interesting, but like, because I mean, if I recall, there's really only three kind of considerations she discusses. There's a command theory, which she rightly dismisses a divine command theory off, right? And then she examines, okay, well, what would a no command theory look like? And she doesn't find that satisfactory. So then she goes back to, okay, well, it's got to be a command theory of a different type. And then she settles on like the social command theory.
Right.
Can we actually explore again the no command theory? Because I'm still kind of partial to Giffin's idea of the no command theory. Like I still like the idea of like, if you value this in this case like the environment's health, then you should not buy a gas guzzler. Like so you're obligated. Exactly. So like, for the sake of acting in accordance with your values, you shouldn't buy it. So like that's in the sense that you're obligated.
Yeah,
So
that was a little bit more of
I,
my intuition going in.
Yeah, me too. Actually, that was my intuition.
No.
So I kind of want to explore that more.
I
agree.
No,
Yeah.
I totally agree, because I literally wrote the paragraph that precedes where she talks about the hypotheticals. I literally wrote a note that says, like, when I say you must read Borges, like, I mean that if you want to be like a wise person or a deep thinker, then that's something that you should do. And it's like a conditional. And then the very next paragraph, she discusses that. And I was like, well, like, again, just Wolf has like an uncanny ability to follow like the reader's mind. It's amazing, actually.
Yeah, she absolutely does.
So let's go there, because that's
Hey,
kind of still
real
where
quick.
I'm situated ultimately.
Yeah, I agree we should do that. Can I say real quick though, like this was more of like kind of a table setting remark, but I think it's good to clarify for the readers. Like the whole reason why, because we've already explained well, I think, why she decouples the concept of obligation versus decisive moral reasons. But I think also for like the listeners, it's good to clarify that the reason she's investigating like what should ground obligation in the first place is because she values obligation in general, right? Like she thinks that, she says, there are good reasons, that is, for wanting our moral and ethical frameworks to contain a distinction between obligatory and the morally desirable, reasons that have been pointed out, for example, by Thomas Hobbes and John Stuart Mill. So basically she's just like aligning with this like intuition that I totally agree with, where it's saying like, okay, I'm not sure what our moral theory is yet, but I do know that there are good reasons to desire that there be a robust distinction between obligation and morally good things, like in general, right? Okay.
That's a very good note.
I thought that was just important to talk about. Yeah. So
especially before discussing, the no command. So
exactly,
because before we all jump on
Yes.
board and we're
Yes,
like, yeah,
yes.
what's her issue with this? It's like, well, she doesn't really get into much of like her issue specifically, but like she does preface saying like, I do want to preserve command.
Yes.
Yeah,
and,
that's true.
I should say like the way that the paper is structured is pretty intuitive as well, because she says like, okay, well, when you hear about like something being an obligation, like the natural question is sort of like, where does that obligation like issue from? And the oldest answer, well, at least one of the oldest answers, has been divine command theory. Like you must do something because God says so. And she takes that down in like a paragraph, right? It's a bad theory.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so then she moves to saying like, okay, well, this like historically influential theory has been knocked down. So, okay, well, what if we go to a no command theory? And that's where we're talking about now.
Yeah. I actually love the opening of this section as well. It was very humorous. So she says, to be frank, I think that much of the time we don't really know what we're saying. I just thought that was like a very, very kind of funny, lighthearted way to introduce it. And it's relevant too.
Which page are we looking at? Okay, is it 8?
This is 238.
Oh,
Oh shit! I'm sorry. I'm talking about the pages in the actual book that I scanned.
6 of 24 is what I have in front of me. Did I?
That doesn't sound wrong, but
okay, yeah, I'm there. Thanks, Giffin.
Yeah.
Are there
I was glad
on the things
crazy.
that I scanned? Are there on the top left or top right? Are there page numbers that you guys can see or no? It doesn't matter.
Did you scan this? I don't see page numbers. I only see.
I actually
I
did
think-
scan it.
I think you just sent us a PDF.
Yeah,
I know.
Say,
I
these are
scanned
not
that. That was what I scanned. That's super weird.
Dude, this looked so much better than if you scanned it. Are you sure?
No, well, there's this like really fancy scanner at the university where you actually just lay the book down and it nothing closes on top of it. It's just like an actual like camera of some sort that just like looks at it and then it synthesizes, I guess, like the
yeah. Well, it was spectacular because it looks like a document that was prepared exclusively digitally, but there is no corner numbers.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh. I actually no, you're right. You know what I did? I did that for the next reading.
Okay.
The one that I sent you was just
I was gonna say they have some like voodoo going on.
No. Don't worry, the next one will be shitty as always.
Thank God.
Yeah. I was gonna say I've never seen a book scanned this well.
I'm sorry. No.
I was literally about to question my own reality about technology.
No, it's nothing. Don't worry.
I am susceptible to being fooled in a supreme degree if that is just scanned manually.
No, it'll be back to the mines for next week.
Okay.
All right. So let's go through this section again so I understand it better. So, do you want me to read?
Please.
All right. Let me actually zoom in so I'm not just guessing the words here. All right. Okay. So, no command theories of obligation. To be frank, I think that much of the time we don't really know what we're saying. Often we want simply to urge someone or some group to behave in a particular way. We are not focusing on the question of whether we think the action is required or merely desirable. As I mentioned before, we speak loosely and freely, and there is nothing wrong with that. But if we use such words as wrong and morally required loosely, we should not draw implications from them that would be warranted only if the words are used in a stricter, more careful way. What can the stricter, more careful use of such words as wrong, morally required, and morally obligatory be? Okay, so if the distinction between what is required and what is good, but not required, that these words mark out is to serve the purposes I earlier mentioned, it must be associated with the distinction between the amount or kind of pressure it can be appropriate to exert in the interest of achieving conformity to certain rules or patterns of behavior. Okay, that's an important line right there. So John Stuart Mill seems to have hit the nail on the head when he wrote, "We do not call anything wrong unless we mean to imply that a person ought to be punished in some way or other for doing it, if not by law, by the opinion of his fellow creatures, if not by opinion, by the reproaches of his own conscience. It is part of the notion of duty in every one of its forms that a person may rightfully be compelled to fulfill it. Duty is a thing which may be exacted from a person, as one exacts a debt." So then he goes on to say, "There are other things which we wish that people should do, which we would like or admire them for doing, perhaps dislike or despise them for not doing, but yet admit that they are not bound to do. It is not a case of moral obligation. We do not blame them, that is. We do not think that they are proper objects of punishment," as he defined earlier. So,
yeah. So okay, a little bit later on in that page, she says, so that she's like kind of re-upped the distinction there between obligation and then what is called like supererogatory, or just like kind of like acts that you do that you are not required to do but that are good anyway, like you're kind of going above and beyond. She says, okay, we now want to consider whether a sense can be given to this claim that does not rely on any sort of commander. So like, I introduced that like, well, it implies a commander, but what if we don't want to have that? We want, in other words, to consider the possibility of a no command theory of obligation. Okay. So in the next paragraph, she does that thing that I mentioned in the very beginning, where she bypasses questions about the content of the moral system. So she's saying like, okay, let's not quibble between like consequentialism and Kantianism, whatever, right? Like, let's just actually talk about like, okay, could we have obligations under a no command theory of morality? So she makes like, okay, so this is getting into the hypothetical imperative. So she makes like these connections to non-moral areas of life, like etiquette, for instance. She says like etiquette could require us to pass the port to the left. Good spelling could require us to spell separate with an A, actually with two. Prudence requires us to get regular dental exams. Similarly, we use the word must not only in moral context, but in non-moral context as well. She's saying like, you must read Hegel. You must see the new Almodovar film. You must visit Venice before it sinks into the sea, right? Okay, but she's saying like, the weird thing about these uses is that they have this hypothetical structure, what Kant called a hypothetical imperative. It's kind of a conditional claim, right? So like, if you want to conform with the rules of etiquette, then you should pass the port to the left, right? If you want to be prudent, you should get regular dental exams. But she thinks that that is too weak, I guess, for a moral system. She says, it is tempting to express this point by saying that When we claim that X is morally required, we do not mean to say morality requires X, as we might say etiquette requires Y, or that good spelling requires Z. Rather, we mean to say that we require X on moral grounds or for moral reasons. But who are we, and on what authority are we able to require anything? So that's, I take it that she's saying there that like, we're not comfortable with saying this like weird, like hypothetical claim where we just say like, if you want to be a moral person, then to do that, you must do the things that are obligatory, right? Like don't murder people, don't murder innocent people.
But it's almost like you could like, she kind of mentioned in like an earlier paragraph that like certain values, like I understand how it's like weaker, but she says like specific values, right? Like, I mean, this wouldn't, you know, this might play for us, but not for a Trump supporter. But you might say that, like, I could say, like, okay, like, you know, if you like value like another's like kind of like emotional well-being, you should use their pronoun, right? You ought to use their pronoun, right? Like, and I wouldn't, maybe that's not an issue for you because, like, you know, maybe it's an inconvenience for you, but you do value kind of like their emotional well-being. So
yeah, it's like overridden by other things. Yeah,
exactly. Like if you do value this, then you will do that. That's like that construction makes sense to me. But like I understand how it's a lot weaker because like if you turn to like a Trump supporter and said like if you value this, and they're like I don't. It's like then it's over. You know what I mean? Like I understand that to an extent, but
and then she'll push back and she says like, okay, but we want to say that like they still should do it. So she's like, okay, so where does that come from? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I understand that now.
Yeah. No. She wants the utility that she decides comes from like a social element to obligation.
Which is also weird. Like, okay, is that in conflict with what she was talking about with moral saints? Like it almost I don't really
I need to
know.
reread it to actually I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I got vibes, but I got nothing much more than vibes at the moment.
Maybe I should just raise that as like a potential question and leave it at that. Because that might be too much, honestly, for us, because we're just trying to understand this paper first of all.
Yeah, I still have some more questions about this paper too. So.
When moon brained all of a sudden, just like
yes. Okay, so here's okay. Let me read a few. This is moving on to the next because, okay, there are these 5 reasons. Okay, she says there's 5 reasons. Let me just read this for a second. To say one is morally required to do something in this sense would imply that all things considered, you should do it in a situation. Oh, wait a minute. I need to read an introductory quote first. Okay, listen to this.
Yeah.
If understanding moral obligations as those practical claims that are required by morality or the moral point of view is not strong enough to capture the normative force of the concept of obligation, exactly what we just said, what if it's too weak? It may be more promising to think of moral obligations as requirements of reason, or more precisely, as requirements of reason in cases in which moral considerations are decisive. Okay, so she's floating this question. She said, like, okay, we want to tell the Trump supporter, you should like conform to this obligation. She's asking why, and she's floating this suggestion. Well, maybe it's because there are requirements of reason, or more precisely, requirements of reason in cases in which moral considerations are decisive. Okay, right? So,
yeah.
She continues to say that one is morally required to do something in this sense would imply that all things considered, you should do it in a situation in which the salient reasons for this judgment are ones of a moral sort. However, it would be a mistake to identify this use with the concept of morally obligatory, insofar as the latter's connection to the appropriateness of social pressure and of blame towards others is to be retained and preserved. I will offer 5 reasons why. Okay, so she's saying like, okay, so this is how I'm taking it at least. We're within the purview of a no command theory. So there's no one who's issuing these commands. She's asking like, okay, where do they come from given that we want these commands to be like in existence, right? So she's floating the idea, maybe they come from the force of reason. Like it is rational. You must comply with like rationality in some sense to like hold these things up. And now she's going to talk about 5 reasons why she thinks that this theory is a weak one for moral obligation. Is that how you're understanding this too?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So let's talk about
specifically
the
because
reasons.
of the relation to social pressure.
Which she
So
thinks
it
has
seems
like
there's
a
a
power.
trade-off, right?
Yes. So here are the 5 reasons. I have them summarized a little bit. We can talk about them. Okay, so first she says it can be extremely difficult to know what one has decisive reason to do. And to be honest, I thought that this was, again, this is like, she's not wrong to raise this, but this is kind of like a non-core epistemic concern, right? Like my thinking was, okay, grant better epistemic access to what one has decisive reason to do. Then does it hold, right? Like kind of get more at the core of it, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So here's the second reason then. She says, it is not clear that this puts us in a position to legitimately stand in judgment on him or to issue blame. So she thinks that someone just having decisive reasons to do something doesn't clearly put us in a legitimate place to stand in judgment with respect to him. I kind of, that's one that I balk at a little bit. At least I have like conflicting intuitions about it. Like, I don't know.
Let me read that whole sentence again there,
Okay.
just because I think the beginning of that sentence is important.
Okay.
So even if we do know that another person has decisive moral reason to do something, okay, so we know they have a decisive moral reason, it is not clear that this puts us in a position legitimately to stand in judgment on him or to issue blame.
You know what? I changed my mind actually, because I'm thinking about, well, maybe you guys can answer this better than I can, but like, okay, go back to my example, like my real life example with my car. I do have the ability to not drive it because I could sell it and buy it. But to be honest, like I don't blame myself. Like I don't judge myself for doing that. Do you guys?
No.
If I was in your position, you mean? Or
No.
you?
But yeah, do you actually judge me? Don't worry, Giffin, I can take it.
I think, yeah, but I don't think it's a harsh judgment, you know? Like I recognize that in like myself. So it's like, I'm not going to be, you know, the devil over here by association.
Well,
like,
no, don't make it like a comparative claim. You know what I mean? Because like just say like flat out for me. Yeah. But
I would incorporate that into my judgment of you. Yes.
Okay. Interesting. That's kind of interesting that you have both like different intuitions about that. I don't know.
I guess just because like I don't know. I guess I have just like a different social expectation in a sense, where I guess it does come kind of back to like social, where it's like that isn't something like I demand of myself or others.
Yeah, and therefore, yeah.
You know, I'm not saying.
Do you view it as a failing that you don't view that as an obligation to yourself or others? Like, is that inconsistent with some moral framework of yours?
Like, to an extent, yes, because it's like it comes down to like if you like if you value the environment, like, and it's within your capability to have a fuel efficient car, then you should have a fuel efficient car.
Yeah.
To an extent, but I don't know. It doesn't. I just don't kind of blame anyone for not having that, I suppose. So, but I mean, it might change if I entered a group of people who were like hyper fixated on the environment, and suddenly like my own perspective might shift, and I might almost feel like they have like a more legitimate reason to be resentful of me given the new group that I'm in. You know what I mean? Like I kind of do see that. I don't know.
And it could also
I feel like
change.
I'm leaning towards the reasoning element here. It's like
so you're
yeah.
I'm just making sure. So your intuition is telling you that if someone has decisive moral reasons to do something, then that puts you in a position to legitimately judge or blame them. That is what you're saying?
Yes, but I think I would still want to preserve some like magnitude spectrum of blame. if that
Yeah.
makes sense. I'm not going to be too harsh on you, Jordan. Don't worry.
Well, no, yeah, but that makes sense though. Like if I was like if the car was way worse or something, like if it was just actively like destroyed, like you could track how much the ozone was destroyed by every time I stepped in the car.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, you could be a criminal at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah,
there.
but in
So
this
it's-
case, we
yeah.
grant that we know it is.
It's low stakes, low blame. But you are still
There is
saying like,
blame.
but they're okay. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
that is
yeah.
basically my take, my intuition at least.
Yeah, I guess like the reason why I grant her point is because all she's saying is like it's not clear that this puts us in a position to legitimately blame. Because to be honest, I do
Yeah.
have the intuition that you have, Giffin, but the problem is I also have the intuition that Adam has for like varying cases. So then if all she's trying to do there is say like it's not clear, then I have to agree with her.
I think that's fair enough, actually, because I'm only kind of declaring like an intuition match there.
Yeah.
So is it like perfectly clear? Is it holding up to like some
Sure.
supreme reason? Like, no, we're kind of exploring
Yeah,
this. So.
yeah, of
Fair
course.
enough.
No, that
actually,
makes
to the
sense.
point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, okay, so I felt like it had something to do with the third reason also, because she says, okay, third, failures to do what one has decisive reason to do in cases in which the salient reasons are non-moral do not result in the kind of guilt and blame appropriate to breaches of moral obligation, nor should they. Okay, so she's drawing an analogy here. She's saying like, there can be decisive reasons to do things in non-moral cases, but when you do not do those, it's like you're also failed to be met with the type of guilt from yourself or blame from other people. And I don't know, like, again, it's like I have both intuitions because like I don't know, I do kind of blame people for like here's the thing, like I definitely blame myself for lapses of
Almost like
non-moral
failings of
reasoning.
character.
Yeah,
in a sense that
willpower.
are like non-moral.
Yeah.
Just like like not going to the gym, eating like a big old Frosty.
Yeah.
So like, so like there's like you have like decisive reasons to not do that and to do otherwise, but.
And like I do, like obviously you guys know this. Like I get furious with myself when I've just been a little piggy for no reason. Like
yeah.
It's so stupid. Like it's like nothing makes me just like loathe myself more.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I actually, this is one of the sections I highlighted in red, which I used to symbolize disagreement, because I was like, I definitely do that.
Yeah, and it's also like I also do just like look down on people for better or worse when like they have those failings too. It's like I don't know, if Adam came to us and he was just like I did something that made no sense whatsoever to do. And he was just like repeatedly doing that. Both of us at a certain point, like, dude, like get a hold of yourself. Like you,
No,
there will be
100%.
blame.
you wanton. Yeah.
And it's almost like I think like this kind of goes back to like her first point, which is like, okay, yeah, we're not gonna like assign blame per se, or I guess what did she use here? Result in a kind of guilt and blame, for things that are like where the decisive what is it, moral obligation, or what's the exact
Decisive moral reason.
Decisive reason, just decisive reason in general, like that, when that's unclear, like we would never kind of like assign blame or like failing on someone else. Like it's like, okay, like do I I suddenly get tickets for like a Steelers game coming up, but then I've also got like my brother's birthday, and it's like, and like they align perfectly, and it's just like
the problem is you could call that a moral question there. You know what I mean?
Okay, true, or something like this car versus that car. You know what I mean? Like
it's just the exact
that's not
thing
clear at all.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Especially from
yeah.
my perspective, it's not clear.
Yes.
So it's like, well, you
Environmental impact the same and everything.
Yeah.
That's
yeah, like the decisive
yeah.
reason wasn't clear, but in other cases, like it can be dead clear. You know what I mean? Where it's just like that seems like a failing on your part to.
And that's it. Like it goes back to like me and my car in real life example. I have decisive reasons, like not non-moral reasons, right? Like just prudential reasons. And I don't do it, and I don't feel bad about it. Like I don't like. Oh, like Giffin, do you still have the like? Do you still like? Okay, take the moral reasons out of it for a second. There are like purely prudential, non-moral reasons for me to sell that car and get a newer car. Like I'll just name two, for instance. Like, namely, I could make money on the endeavor, and then two, like I would save money going forward because I could get a cheaper, more efficient car. So those are like non-moral reasons.
Yeah, those
right?
are good non-moral reasons.
Yeah,
so
and they're decisive.
If they are decisive, like if you grant that, then yes, that's a basis for judgment in my mind.
Really?
Because you granted that they're decisive. Now, in reality, I have no idea if they are. Like you made it just like an aesthetic value, in which case like that would compete with those other reasons you gave. But if once you tell me that it's decisive, I'm like, yes. What are you doing, you clown? You said it was decisive.
See, I guess this is why I was thinking about this in the context of like the moral saints, like plurality aspect, because like, okay, I guess is the question here, like, do other values get baked into whether it's decisive or not? Or can you have like a decisive set of reasons that then are just trumped by like some other value?
That's what I wrote down actually, because I wasn't sure if like decisive implied like
all things considered,
outcompete everything. Yes.
Yeah.
I wrote that down. Like I was writing that before, and I missed one of your
that makes sense. Yeah.
Comments. So that I mean, if I take that to be like what decisive means, so like if you know it like outcompetes everything and you don't do it, I'm like, yes, I'm going to be willing to assign blame, even if it's for non-moral reasons. That may be like kind of incorrect of me to do so, but at least that's my intuition. Once you grant that.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like, okay, after this, I'm going to try to go golfing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's like, are there decisive reasons to actually not go golfing? Prudentially speaking, yes. I could get the same workout. I could even get a better workout if I just biked to the gym and then ran on the treadmill, right? I could also save money if I do that. I could like all these reasons, right? But so, okay, here's the question, like, but my response to those reasons is, okay, but I want to go golfing. Like there's still going to be like good thing. Like I'm still going to get a workout. Like
you don't know if it's decisive, and certainly we don't.
Well, no,
that's what I'm kind of like imagining.
Okay, so you are baking like even my desire to go golfing and like my satisfaction of being able to like get better as like that's baked into the calculus for you.
Well, I mean, once you grant, it has to be, because otherwise it's not really decisive in that sense, right? Decisive in my mind is kind of meaning like it is like the decision to make.
Okay,
accounting for things. If that makes sense. I don't know if that's the way she views it, though. Actually,
that's my question. Is like, okay, because there's another framing you could have where it's like prudentially, this is decisive reasoning, right? But then I could say, I just don't care what's prudent in this like circumstance because I want to go golfing. And I don't know, like, because here, okay, like I'm just thinking about this out loud. Like the problem with the first way of framing it is the incommensurability issue that she was raising before. Right? Like, you're trying to like reduce everything to a single value, and we all kind of seem to have the intuition that that's not always possible.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I had to write something else down. So it seems like I don't know how you framed it before, but I guess there is a difference between saying like I have decisive prudential reasons not to versus I have decisive non-moral reasons. Kind of expands the scope of the claim.
That's
I didn't even question.
That's true.
Are we understanding decisive as like sufficient to like determine decision?
Yes.
Okay.
At least like, and I guess the question that we are now discussing is like, is that within? Could you have like decisive reasons within many different frameworks, or can you only have just like, can a reason either just be like all things considered decisive or not?
I think there
I could say you could have multiple decisive reasons, right?
Yeah.
Like that's my understanding of what she was saying was that
makes
like
sense to
you
me.
could have like a decisive reason like morally, but then there might be non-moral decisive reasons.
Yeah.
Where
yes.
These could all result in decision, but like you know, I mean.
And the Moral Saints paper actually discusses like the relationship between like the scope of non-moral reasons and the moral reasons.
Yeah.
Whether like, there should be an absolute dominance in that hierarchy.
Like Jordan's car, like it's just an awesome car. Like, and so like, I mean, like it's
a good aesthetic reason, decisive almost.
It's one of the coolest cars I've ever seen. So it's like, okay, I mean, that's certainly a non-moral decisive reason for keeping the car, but then there's a decisive moral reason, and like that it affects the environment, but certainly one wins out over the other. So is the only one decisive ultimately, because that's the one that acted, that, you know, was the decision kind of dependent reason. Or I don't know.
I almost like the framing of saying there are decisive reasons on two, but probably more, at least two axes there.
Yeah.
And it's not, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm convinced that you can't say that there is like an overall decisive reason to do it, because it's like, but I'm going to choose which of those decisive reasons that I act upon, right? Like I'm going to do that. And like in this case,
Sartre, you must choose.
Like,
no, actually, Jordan, I like that a lot, actually. You can't really say there's overall without kind of implying there that you've already established a relationship between those different axes.
Yeah, which like I do kind of agree with her that like some things honestly like intuitively just are incommensurable. Like you just can't, like how do you weigh like one unit of aesthetic like value versus one unit of like environmental? I don't know how to do that.
No, that's exactly true.
Okay.
Would that lend it to like that viewpoint to Giffin's earlier point, which is that within a moral framework you're blameworthy? but like, you know, overall, like it's quite understandable. So
it would lend itself to that. Which might be true, actually.
Jordan's like, maybe I put my catalytic converter back on.
But
because you're not trying to like achieve moral sainthood, as Wolf said, but you're definitely not achieving moral perfection. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know.
So I think I think the answer to that question depends on whether you think that like decisive moral reasons, because remember, there's still the question of like, is the command due to decisive moral reasons, or is it due to like social pressure, or is it due to like a divine like you know being or whatever? So like you could still say, I think we've opened the door to being able to say you could be morally obligated to do something and just choose differently, and then you would be morally blameworthy, even though it's not like even though, like, for lack of a better term, the decision could be understandable, all things considered.
Yes.
I think that's a fair framing.
Yeah. Okay. Should we mention the fourth and fifth reasons? And then, because I don't remember if I thought these were crazy interesting or not.
Yeah, we can glance over them. I didn't have any notes on them.
Let me read them just to refresh my own memory. Okay, so she says a fourth reason for not identifying what one has decisive moral reason to do with what one can be appropriately punished or blamed for not doing is that in the absence of publicly expressed social expectations, a person may not know what she has decisive moral reason to do, which like that seems to be pretty grantable. Yeah. Like one of the reasons why you have decisive moral reasons to do something is precisely because of the, you know, like society that you're in. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay, fifth and finally, there is a range of cases in which my intuitive judgments about what one has decisive moral reason to do and about reasons to do and about what is morally obligatory come apart. And we've already granted that like 10 times to Sunday, because that's like, you know, what she that's what we were just talking about with like the decoupling. Okay. All right. So
we still got a good bit of paper, actually.
Well, maybe not in the sense that we
kind
did.
of jumped around.
We talked about the SUV case already.
But let me regroup for a second. Okay. So we've all expressed, like, in the past, 10 minutes or whatever, we kind of talked ourselves into thinking that there might be better reasons than Wolf grants to aligning, maybe not decisively, but like aligning with a no command theory, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, we're at least, like, I think we've all like opened that door a little bit to ourselves. So I think now we need to discuss, so we need to skip then to the section called the social command theory revisited. And I think we need to discuss why she actually values the social command theory, right? Because that's kind of like the last section that we haven't covered yet. Okay.
Yeah, I was already there actually.
Okay.
So.
Nice.
Which
All right.
given what page?
Excuse me. This is page 14 of 24.
Okay.
Okay. So within this section, let's feel free to skip around, but I'll say that one thing that I tried to remember while reading this is, again, so it's not about the content of the moral theory at hand. It's about whether a social command theory is better than a no command theory. So that's the question at hand right now. So I think here's the way that I kind of like summarize this entire section in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so she's saying like, okay, so because it's not about the content, right? She's asking the rhetorical question like, okay, given a society and a set of reasons that both equally say to do X, we don't care what X is, and X to the same degree, right? So they're saying do this to a certain degree, and both society and the set of reasons are saying with equal force to do X and to do X to a certain degree, right? Then the question is like remaining, which way of demanding X, of saying it's obligatory, is stronger? And I think in this section, like Wolf does make a compelling case that this social command is going to be stronger than just like decisive reasons for saying you must do X to a certain degree. Is that like, do you guys have any quibbles with at least like how I'm framing this section?
No, I agree with what was said there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. So what reasons does she give for valuing the social command theory? Okay, here's the first one that this is kind of lower on that page. She seemed to be saying like, there's something valuable in the idea that when you fail to perform an obligation, that you're failing someone. Like you're not just kind of failing in general, but like it's more powerful to frame it as like, and to believe it as you are failing someone.
Yeah. Can I read that line here?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So as Adam's remarks make clear, no such problem arises for theories that identify moral obligations with social requirements or commands. In those theories, a failure to discharge one's obligations constitutes a disruption of social relations, a breaking of faith, or of allegiance with one's society. It is easy to understand how this can appropriately lead to guilt in those who care about being on good terms with their society, and anger or criticism on the part of those who identify with a society that has been ignored or defied. So this seems like, I don't know, how should I frame this? I don't know. Was that like a useful quote?
No, it was.
I have like highlighted.
Yeah,
it's just hard to like parse her underlying.
No. I think she's saying like, okay, look, there's something real about the idea that when you fail a society, like there's a group of people who you are failing, and that's more powerful than just like failing like rationality in general or something.
Is that more powerful just practically? Like, is it an observation that humans will respond more to that and engage in appropriate, like more desired behavior more frequently? Like, I'm not sure the level of her claim there. That's what I gather, but I'm not 100% sure.
I think like the word like appropriate is a pretty good word, like in that paragraph where it's like, you know, like yeah, oh, you did, my bad, yeah. So but no, you did. So I was just Pavlovian conditioned there to recognize that was the important word.
That's true.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just like, especially when it comes to like guilt or blame, I mean, it comes down to like, these are more appropriate concepts when it's like, you know, interpersonal, right? Like these are social relations. So there's an appropriateness to these emotions. So
like almost drawing from her the importance of free will stuff. Yeah. And I'm also noticing well, we will later in the course. Yes. Shit, what was I gonna say? Oh, like, okay, I noticed like in both of these last papers, like she is sort of unabashedly she's placing like a lot of value also on like kind of what works, for lack of a better sense. Like she's like, I noticed that she doesn't seem to want to endorse a moral theory that could be the most sort of like internally consistent, most parsimonious, whatever, right? If it just like doesn't map on to how the world works.
Yeah, that is an underlying thread that I identified as well. Like it's
Yeah.
very practical. She says like we want to, kind of inform other people's decisions. We want
it's almost like there's like a bit of underlying pragmatism almost.
I mentioned the practicality, and I'm like, is that what is like? She's basically underlying all this. Is that like what powerful means? Just like it will result in more conformity or like better practical result. Is that like what it is in the end? Like I'm not if there's something deeper than that or adjacent to that, I'm not sure, but like that's what underlies it for me.
Yeah, because like Wolf really values intuition and doesn't want to like throw the baby out with the bathwater, and it's just like, okay, like maybe there's something worth preserving in some of our intuition, rather than just saying like, ultimately, who deserves blame, or why feel guilt? And it's like, okay, I mean, ultimately, like, there may be like no reason whatsoever, but like is there something sense? Yeah, is there something in a certain sense worth preserving here? So is there like a philosophical kind of basis for it? So I think
I think it's fair to say that she thinks it's a useful institution, like the idea of like social obligation like this.
Yeah, or moral obligation specifically. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I also feel like she would be unsatisfied with basing it merely in that, though.
That's what I get the vibe of, but like I can't articulate anything. It's merely impressions.
I know. That again, that might be something that we should just kind of keep in mind for more episodes, because we're going to be continuing with like value theory.
The more we read from her, maybe that will backfill in like because we had a little bit of that because we've read one paper before, two papers before this, and I think we were able to fill in some. But especially if she's just pumping out like 20 pagers, like they'll fill in each other. Maybe we will get the answers eventually.
They will.
They will. Yeah. They might. Okay, should we?
They might. They were like they will. They might. All right, move
on. Should we conclude by I don't remember exactly what I thought about. She kind of, to conclude this section, she talks about like the two most serious objections to social command theory, and then she kind of argues against those to preserve it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know what page this is for you, but halfway down, it's the social command theory revisited. It's that page, then another page, then the third page. It's halfway down that for me.
What is the?
How does the paragraph start?
Let us then bracket, but it's not that sentence. It's in that paragraph. She says, on the one hand, it appears
page 17. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm on there.
Found it.
On the one hand, it appears that societies have sometimes demanded, in the guise of moral obligations, actions that were not, in fact, morally obligatory. They have demanded that people refrain, for example, from homosexual activity and masturbation, and that they refrain from sexual activity altogether outside the confines of marriage. Worse, it seems that societies have sometimes demanded that its members actively harm people who are in one way or another regarded as outsiders. Okay, so this can be summarized as like, here's a problem with social command theory. Some societies have had like the wrong obligations, actually. Like
some societies suck.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The other problem is summarized a few sentences later. She says, on the other hand, some societies have failed to recognize as morally obligatory what many would say are our actual obligations. So this one is like missing the true obligations. So there's like two sides of the coin. You can either like actively endorse the wrong obligations, and you can fail to see the correct one. So those are two problems.
She calls them false positives and false negatives, which I thought was very useful, at least for me.
No, that's right. Yeah, so. False positives, false negatives, great. Okay, so how does she respond to those? Basically, I recall her, maybe I'm wrong about this, but she kind of responds to them both in the same manner, where she says like, let me find it. She says, Okay. Did you have something more specific, Giffin?
I mean, I wanted to talk about the genocide paragraph because
Okay,
that to me was something
sure.
that I found a little bit objectionable. Because she seems to
The
like,
paragraph or genocide?
for some reason, she's objectionable to genocide. Let's
Yeah.
let's discuss. No,
Let's
no.
yeah.
So
the fire in his glasses.
there's a thumbnail for
Drop
us.
the
Yeah.
atom bomb.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
because I just need to remember because it's a couple pages down or like one or one and a half, and I'm
Okay.
not sure under which kind of question that is housed in. So
Okay.
I was hesitant to jump down, but I do want to talk about
No,
that.
go
That's
for it. Yeah.
It basically like this from what I can remember. I don't want to try to read through and square it, but you guys can give me your impression. She basically one of the objections is like broadly is some societies suck, and she basically says like, well, here's like let's discuss like
Is this the morally horrific behavior without bad faith or hypocrisy? She's saying like a society that just like at their core believes in this. Is that what you're talking
I
about?
think before that. This is before.
Yeah, a little before.
Okay,
So I'm on.
okay.
Yeah.
I don't have your page numbers, Jordan, but I'm on.
No,
page
it's
18,
okay.
actually.
Just
So it's the
just
next
summarize
page.
it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So basically, I'll read the end of the previous paragraph. According to social command theory, it appears that members of such societies had no obligation to refrain from participating in genocide. But this seems a reductio ad absurdum. Any theory that fails to recognize genocide as morally intolerable has to be wrong. And then she said, before accepting this argument, it is worth examining whether, and if so, in what kind of case, a social command theory would have such an implication. So she's basically exploring, like, is this an implication?
Oh,
this is. Has there ever been in a society that has not regarded genocide as morally forbidden? And I'm like,
I thought that
yes.
I thought this was like pretty weak argument actually.
It was. This is the only place I highlighted in red. I was like, this is a yes, almost certainly. Like maybe like I'm just like, completely off base here, but intuition wise, I was like, almost certainly.
Well,
like,
so here's the weird thing, because she's like, okay, I feel like she's not being particularly explicit about this, but she's almost like, okay, she's almost saying something along the lines of like, if you're solely grounded in like social command theory, then you have no place really to like, then how could you say genocide is wrong if you grant a society that like down to their core, like what I read was kind of like a re-upping of this point, almost like an intensification of it. She's saying like, okay, like what about a society that just like at its core believed that genocide was like a moral thing to do potentially?
Yeah.
And she's like, okay, I thought she almost said something like, well, if like the social command is the only thing we have to stand on, then I don't see how we can say that's wrong. But what you just read about the reductio ad absurdum seems to be like, okay, well, social command is like grounded within like the idea that that society does have to believe roughly the correct things. Right? She like,
yeah,
but she's not explicit about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I need to kind of maybe reread this, but
I
this
know
was something I read
Jordan,
and I did a double take. I was like, what? Like, I do think, especially if we were based on a previous point we were talking about earlier, if we can define society a little bit more loosely to include like subgroups, absolutely, 1,000,000%. Like this is a like practical consideration, which you'd think she'd be a little bit more concerned about addressing. But anyways.
I mean, I kind of do understand her point to an extent of just like how it might not be a good fit to try to map like this, social command theory onto like, societies that, lived like maybe like 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, just given the fact that, their values, they didn't hold the same values we do now. So it's like, okay, in that case right there, from our perspective, we would say, okay, if that type of person lived in society now, like, okay, like they would not be, I mean, they would have certain obligations they would not have had. So it's almost like it's not a one-to-one match.
And she buttresses that point with something that caught me off guard in that I've always done this and I never realized. But she says, like, when you hear about atrocities that happened thousands of years ago, you're never morally indignant at them. You're always just curious at like how that could have happened, or like, you never view that person as like immoral. You always just say like, wow, like you kind of you want to like learn more about the historical context. You're never like, this is a monster.
Really?
It's
I think we can do that.
But to be honest, like what she
It's tough. I'm in between you guys right
Like
now.
Hitler's like, huh, very curious.
No, but again, but the problem is like that's way too recent in the sense that like, okay, she gives the
Genghis
example.
Khan, then, you know.
Genghis Khan.
Yeah, to be honest, like whenever I hear, like I listen to that like hardcore history series about, and to be honest, I never felt like morally indignant about that. It like, okay, which is not saying I don't think it's wrong, like obviously, right? But like her point is that like, wow, okay, there's actually something like, for lack of a better word, it's like it's almost more understandable that he acted in the way he did, given that like there was not the social obligations put on him that we would have today, or he would have placed on him if he lived today. Do you know
I
what
don't
I mean?
know. Yeah, I think you're right, but I'm not sure if that's something that like I'm okay with. Like I think the fact that it's more understandable given like the vast different social context makes it more obvious to us. I don't know if that makes it prevents me from being morally indignant. Just purely on an intuition level.
Like, do you actually like whenever you hear like just flat out descriptively, I'm not morally indignant.
I do.
No, I think I'm a bit.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah,
The
I
math,
think, because
like,
I think you phrased it very
rapist,
well,
yeah.
Jordan, and that's how she would respond, maybe.
Yeah.
But honestly, like, yeah, like when I hear about like Christopher Columbus, like, you know, literally like cutting off the ears of like the Native Americans, like the Tainos, like
The Taino,
yeah.
I mean, it just
that
like
one's so tough too, because it's like a white European man against like indigenous.
Jordan's like, I'm not
but
willing to be morally indignant to my own race.
No,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
saying
just
that's like one of the
No, I
it's
know.
like the opposite.
I know.
Jesus.
No, complete joke. That was a complete joke.
Clip that.
Yeah, but it's just like, okay, did he have the same social obligations? No.
Yeah.
No, the same social moral obligations? No. No, not at all. But there really is something visceral about that behavior that is just like, are we fully capturing it with just the social obligations? Like, you know, I don't think that fully captures it. Like he was, you know,
I don't know.
I definitely think the magnitude is different between like viewing about someone doing something like today, like, you know, this somewhere, you know, in East Asia, like some genocide or something, like, okay, that like I'm going to react to that differently than like looking at it from a historical framework. But I'm just not sure, like, I'm not sure if that like is that okay for me to do? I'm not sure. Like maybe I should be more morally indignant towards these people in the past. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, because the thing is like, okay, say everybody was wicked 500 years ago, right? And this is just like the behavior that everybody engaged in with like no remorse, and there was like, and like in fact like society like endorsed it, right? Then it's like, okay, I think I'm more on like Wolf's side at that point, but it's like, okay, no, there were good people in those societies, like people we would call good now.
Yes,
you know what I mean? So so it's like,
I'm going to expand my definition of society to encompass people in the past and then have the grounds to morally blame them.
Yeah, but it's just like, it's like, okay, were they socially kind of like endorsed in that good behavior? No, they might have even been condemned.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't know. There's certainly an element of the social obligation with all this, but it doesn't capture it fully for me.
And the weird thing is, like, it doesn't seem to capture it fully for Wolf either. But then she's not like, I don't know, because she like, I thought it was congruent with her view that she would still want to say, like, I think she said this like outright somewhere. She's like, okay, we still want to be able to say that like those people were moral people, but it can't be on the grounds of what like the social command was. So it's like, it almost seems like she was implying like, okay, like the social command is like this layer over top of something else. And it's not a trivial layer, right? Because it like actually matters. But
of course.
Yeah.
But then, so maybe we're just like, maybe the next paper is going to show us like what's underneath that then or something. It's just,
I hope it does, because this is really interesting. Like, we are, I think, all left with like a little bit of questioning about like, even what Wolf means. But like, I think these are really valuable things to bring up. Like, I like her question begging. Like,
Yeah, definitely.
I also think it's a pretty decent framework. Like, I just think that there are like serious questions like that can be posed where it's like, can we, or would it have been appropriate for, Christopher Columbus to feel guilt for what he did in that time period when, society at large did not condemn it? Maybe even say like his peer group or his social group like didn't condemn it. Would that have been an appropriate emotion for him? Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
I would say so. I would say that would be appropriate. Or it would be appropriate to blame him during that time period. Someone in that time period saying, like, look at what you did, you monster, even if 99% of people were like, in fact, we endorse that behavior. I don't know.
Which is kind of showing support more for the no command theory, given that you're going to like say you want to blame him, and it's the only place you can look is decisive moral reasons, because like you specifically in that instance can't look to the social command, because the social command would have okayed it.
Yeah, actually, this is like a total thought that popped in my head. But if she's gonna like, it seems like we are kind of all in like somewhat agreement. If she's gonna talk about like social command theory and say like if the reasons are mostly just practical, that practical is actually like the practicality there is also has that weird conditional of like if you endorse like the moral values there, and that seems kind of like odd. Like if you already grant like an agreement with like the moral values, then like there's a lot of utility into like the obligation framework. But like in net, if you kind of grant a lot of moral value spectrum, especially over time, is the idea of like the obligation like a net positive? I'm not sure, like in a practical lens.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was coherent, but I don't know. I think that at least this paper really allows you to kind of self-reflect and
it is an interesting
on others.
Paper.
Yeah. I love the paper.
Yeah.
This is my favorite Wolf paper so far. I'm willing to re-explore some of the previous ones as well.
Yeah, I'm just left with more questions than answers with this one, to be honest. I'm kind of like, and maybe not in the best sense. I love the paper, but it's more so like I'm not so sure about the paper. Like just because there are a lot of questions. So
I'll have to, maybe offline, I'll have to report back after Wednesday if I get any like clarifications about this stuff.
That would be excellent. Yeah.
I should dip back into it too, because like Giffin, because we had that quick turnaround. I mean, like I did spend 3 hours reading once through. So I did take time, but
thorough. Yeah.
It was a one read though.
A thorough one read. That's what
exactly.
No, of course. Yeah. Yeah. I'm much more satisfied though. I like this, the reordering that we did where we discuss before I have the class.
That'll be hugely beneficial to you.
But I also think like the episodes are more enjoyable too to record. Like it's more fun to like be like, okay, I don't know what the fuck's going on at the beginning of the episode, but like, you know what I mean? Like let's figure it out.
That's true.
And like before you reread it, like before like your lecture, like these are all things that are gonna be buzzing through your head. Like
of course.
Just like what was Adam's point here? It said right here on page 17 exactly how she addresses this. You know what I mean? But like,
it's also
it'd be a good reread though. Like in that sense,
no, it's true. It's always better to class time is precious, and it's always better to have like refined questions ready to go than the initial questions ready to go. Because like
it's a very practical way to do that.
For my own edification, like I want to know the answers to my refined questions, not my, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Not like intuition kind of impressions.
Yeah, I figure out like exactly where they clash or whatever, and then exactly. Yeah. All right, nice. I don't remember off the top of my head the next essay that we'll be doing in the series, but it is it's in line with like moral theory in general, so it should be, hopefully it'll answer more questions. So all right, well, I hope that everyone's enjoying the series so far. I know I definitely am, and hope that people tune in next time. If you want to support the show in any way, you can do so simply by sharing it. I'm hoping to get this show out to more people, and so if you want to share it on Twitter or social media, that would really help me. You can also rate it on Apple Podcasts, like this video if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe via Apple Podcasts or an RSS feed. or you can connect me with recommended guests or topics to cover. You can get in contact with me at platoscavepodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at Jordan_C_Myers. And I now have a website for my philosophy endeavors at jordanmyers.org. If you want to know a little bit more about me and my fellow co-hosts, I'm a master's student in philosophy at the University of Houston. I did my undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh, where I studied mechanical engineering and philosophy. And now that I'm back at school, I'm hoping to more closely study moral responsibility, free will, ethics, epistemology, and moral psychology. Those are topics that I was introduced to and got really interested in my undergrad work. Adam and Giffin accompanied me on this show, and Adam is one of my oldest friends. We actually met in kindergarten, and we've been interested in philosophical topics for as long as we can remember, and in a lot of ways, it's been the basis of our friendship. Adam studied chemistry and biology at Cornell, and he's especially interested in moral responsibility as well, but also law, religion, and free will. Giffin is also one of my oldest friends. We've been friends since elementary school as well. Giffin studied biology and economics at RPI, and now he works in human health research. And he's particularly interested in exploring political philosophy. With all of that information, again, I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you get in contact with me or follow my work in any way that you deem reasonable to do. So with that, thank you for listening.